Jessica Jackson. And Jessica Jackson is the president and CEO of Reform and the Reform Action Fund. Jessica, thank you for being with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
So, Jessica, this bill, which passed both chambers of the House and Senate, is a bipartisan bill, right?
Yeah.
Now it's getting jammed up because of lobbyists and the minority leader, which I call lock 'em up Lurch, right? He's gumming the thing up and trying to stop it from getting to the governor's desk. What is going on here, Jessica?
Listen, at this point, we're in a good position. We've passed unanimously in the Senate. We passed in the House. We're in a good position, headed over to the governor's desk. We're very happy. We think this is going to make a huge difference for Virginians. You mentioned the First Step Act. I had the honor of working very, very closely with Trump administration last term, and working with Ivanka and Jared and so many other members of our community, our law enforcement folks, victims of crime survivors, people on both sides of the aisle, really, and passing just a substantial bill, the First Step Act, that has led to a 39% decrease in recidivism. And one of the key, that means 39% fewer people who have gotten out of prison going back into prison. And one of the key components of that was earned time credits. Now that means if people are inside prison or if they're on probation, in this case, they actually get to earn time off by taking life-changing classes. And that's exactly what this Virginia bill does. It incentivizes people to take classes that are going to make it much more likely for them to succeed and your community to be safe. So we're really excited to be headed to the governor's desk, looking forward to seeing him sign this bill and hoping to see a huge difference for all Virginians.
Well, there should be no drama here because Governor Youngkin has in the past done executive orders that are not far from the intent of this particular bill. So is there any risk of him not signing it?
There's always a risk, right? You don't, you're not living inside the governor's head. But like you said, this is consistent with the executive order that he signed over the summer. In fact, we based it upon that. And it's consistent with what I believe is his private views, given his work with a nonprofit on reentry, right? We know that if we are supporting people when they come out of prison or when they're on probation and parole, they've had that contact with the system. If we support them and we give them life-changing classes and give them access to education and let them earn their way off of probation and parole, we're all going to be much safer. I actually saw this in real time in my own life, right? Oftentimes people are, kind of caught up in this probation and parole system. Unfortunately, when I was much younger, I was 21. My first husband was arrested for his drug addiction and ended up going to prison. He was sentenced to 15, served 6 down in Georgia. We had a 2-month-old daughter at the time. It was absolutely devastating for our family. Ruined us financially, lost our home, ended up losing our marriage about 3 years into it. And as devastating as that moment was, I gotta say it was even more devastating when he came home. He got his life back on track. He found a job. He got into housing. He was reconnecting with our daughter, who was about 4 years old at that time. And he got pulled over by a police officer for a broken taillight. And when he got pulled over, unfortunately, there had been a mishap with the paperwork, and he ended up getting arrested. They thought he hadn't been reporting for his probation, which he had, and he was taken back to jail, and it took about 2 months to sort the whole thing out. And once he was released, he had lost his job, he had lost his housing, and he was just devastated. It was just a punch in the gut, and even more so than when he initially had gone into prison. So I've seen this happen too often to people where they get stuck in this, loop of being stuck on probation and parole and not having a way out. So this really with the ability to shorten the amount of time that they're on probation and parole in exchange for taking classes that we know are going to make it more likely for them to succeed.
Well, this is all this bill is. Basically, some of the people that have been trying to, and there is an effort by the lobbyists to not get this to the governor's desk, to just jam it up there. That's part of why I wanted to have you on today, because I've heard that internally. I hope that doesn't happen. But I've talked to there's people that have said, well, we got to keep the criminals. I'm opposed to this bill because I want to keep the criminals off the streets. Well, this is a probation bill. They're already on the street. I mean, they're not in prison and now they're getting out early. Yeah. I mean, it's like these people, they don't even know what this is. This is what drives me crazy. Like, it's just basically a talking point or whatever. So these are people that have done time. They have been allowed to go on probation. So they're out of jail. They're on probation. And what this bill does is, if you do the right things, you take the right classes, you're doing everything like you're supposed to, which dramatically decreases the chances of you doing something to get back in prison, then you get off probation quicker. And if you get off probation quicker, then if you're locked, if you have a tail light out and you get pulled over, well, you're not on probation. So then you're like everybody else. And that's not part of that you don't have to put that on your job application. All that stuff goes away. And then the probation officer, who's overworked as it is, can then focus his efforts on those that might be struggling a little bit more. How does this not make sense?
I mean, that's what we're seeing. This is common sense. And by the way, it's not just common sense, it's cost effective. We have seen cost savings in millions of dollars in other states where we've been able to do this, and it increases public safety. We've seen that people are more successful when they have access to these programs, access to education. It also is helpful for people who are probation officers, right? They want it too, because they don't want to have a million people on their caseload. They want to be able to focus their precious resources, your taxpayer dollars, on people who actually need them to be focused on them so they can prevent future crimes. So this is just a win-win-win, and we're looking forward to seeing the governor sign it.
You're on the John Fredericks Media Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. We're with Jessica Jackson. Jessica is the CEO of the Reform Alliance, and I want to thank her for being on today. What are the next steps in getting this done? Because this is, to me, cutting, and like you said, recidivism since the First Step Act is down 39%. I mean, think about that. That's 4 out of 10 people not going back to jail. That's huge.
It's huge. And by the way, of the people who are still going back to jail, it's about 12.5% of the people being released under First Step Act. 4% of them are not going back for new crimes. They're just going back for technical violations, for breaking a rule, for being late to meet a probation officer, for not being able to pay their fine or fee on time, right? So we got a lot of work to do. Next steps for Virginia is, of course, for the governor to sign the bill. So we want everybody out there thanking him for his doing so when he does do it. And we want everybody out there supporting this bill. And please, please, please become a reformer. Join our fight. Go to reformalliance.com and follow us at Reform on social media.
I'm a big believer in what you guys are doing. Very impressed with the organization you've put together. And, so many of you in your organization and the Reform Alliance have had personal experiences with this, like you have. And, Jessica, I remember fighting that battle in the first Trump administration, and we had so many people that were detractors of this bill on our side that it was very disheartening for me. And I remember one time, telling Jared, because he was getting this is basically Jared Kushner was carrying the holder on this thing, and I remember telling him one time, don't be discouraged, because he was getting skewered on the right, just skewered. And I'm like, look, your father believes in this thing. We got to get this done. You're going to go down in history as just making a difference, because we have to do something to stop recidivism. I mean, the revolving door, going to prison, getting out, committing another crime, going back. And here's the problem. the longer time you're in there is what I've been told. I haven't done that, but I've been told from others. The longer time you're in there, the more apt you are to commit a crime when you get out because you're being trained how to be a criminal. True or false?
True. People are traumatized when they're inside of prisons, right? They're in overcrowded conditions. It's not safe inside. They've got black mold in their cell. The food that they're eating literally is labeled oftentimes not for human consumption. It's disgusting conditions. You can't expect somebody to turn their life around inside of those conditions. And by the way, we're not even really talking about letting people out. We're talking about the 95% of people who are inside prisons that when they come out, they're going to be your neighbors. They're going to be in your community, right? So First Step Act, which passed in 2018, addressed those circumstances. Now we're talking about, with our Virginia bill, people who are already in your community, people who just need a second chance and an ability to actually earn their way into being able to be successful, not having this stuff hanging over their heads, having a true second chance, and saving taxpayers money.
Jessica, with us, I want to get to a phone call here. Tony in North Carolina, line 1 for Jessica Jackson of the Reform Alliance. Tony, go ahead. You're on with John and Jessica.
John, I think this is the biggest bunch of baloney I have ever heard. This is a bunch of baloney. These people have got access to schools. They got access to learning what they want to learn. They've got access to everything. It's going to take our tax dollars to line up all this stuff this crazy woman's wanting to do. This is a bunch of bull. These people are not in prison. They come back out. I know they go in and out. But she's acting like they go in there and they're supposed to be having a big party every day. It's punishment.
Well, Tony, we're not talking about that. Thank you for the call. 888-480-JOHN, 888-480-5646. You want to weigh in. Tony, I thank you for the call. And they go to prison and they're punished. But now they're out. They got out. They got out and they're on probation. And so what this bill does, if you're doing everything right on probation, what this bill does, it allows you for earned credit to get off probation faster, to have a quicker time of assimilating back in society, which is what we want. We don't want them committing another crime and going back in jail. We want them to be successful, adjusted people, our neighbors that have a job, can have a family. And so the things they do to earn the time out of probation, they're already out of jail, right? They've already gotten out. Now we're in the rehabilitation process. And what we don't want them to do is to go back in. And the attitude of, just somebody commits one crime one time and lock them up in perpetuity. I mean, that's kind of the extreme view. I understand that some of them have it. I fought this battle with the First Step Act and Jared. I get it. I get your argument. I get Lurch and Shenandoah Valley, right? Todd Gilbert. I get that. Rob Bell. I mean, I understand where they're coming from. But if you don't do something, look, the First Step Act reduced recidivism by 40%. Do you not want a 40% reduction in people going back to jail? I mean, would you rather it not be 40%? I mean, you want people to get out. They've made a mistake. They've done their time. They've done their punishment. Don't you want them to get out and then be successfully assimilate in life, Jessica?
Absolutely. And I want to add one more thing there that the caller raised was taxpayer dollars. And just to be clear, your taxpayer dollars are actually going to be going further because you're going to be saving money. In fact, they did this in South Carolina, and they're now saving $20 million per year by just giving people an opportunity to earn time off their probation by completing life-changing classes, getting their education, volunteering in their community, etc. So we're not spending your taxpayer dollars on this program. In fact, we're saving you money and making sure that the resources probation officers have can actually be focused on people who are in serious need. Let me add another story here, another case. There was a horrible, horrible case out in California. It was a parole case where a woman was held, kidnapped, J.C. Dugard, and unfortunately sexually assaulted over a period of years. I think it was 12 years she was held by somebody. Horrific, horrific crime. That man was on parole, and his parole officer would come to his house and he would look around the house quickly, and then he'd say, okay, everything looks fine, and he would move on to the next house. What he missed was that this woman, this poor woman, was being held in the backyard in a little tent where she was assaulted and living our worst nightmare every single night for 12 years. Because that parole officer had so many cases on his caseload, he could only spend a few minutes at the house, and he missed this, and this woman continued to be tortured. What we want to do is free up those probation and parole officers so that they have the time to focus on people who really need the resources. They have the time to make sure that people like that aren't committing heinous crimes, and that other people who are doing the right thing are able to earn their way off of probation sooner so that they can free up those resources for them to.
Let's get to Amy in Wilmington, Delaware. Amy, you're on with John and Jessica.
Yeah, I had a question. I wonder if this is you're solving one problem and creating another. My understanding is in Virginia, while someone is on probation, they do not have to pay child support for when they were in prison. But once they go off probation, they do have to pay back child support with interest. And I'm wondering how many people who, they get their life together, they may get better skills while they're on probation and get a job, are put in a situation where they're not making enough yet to pay back child support with interest.
That's a great question. Jessica?
And then stop paying.
Yeah, I don't know the child support laws in Virginia, but I do know that people, obviously, when they're in prison, they cannot pay child support, right? When they're on probation and they're taking these classes and they're able to get their education, they're going to be able to get better jobs and they're going to be able to be more successful. And when a person is successful, their children are going to be more successful. So this is something good that uplifts the entire family, uplifts the entire community, and will help increase public safety.
In the United States, we don't have a debtor's prison. However, if you don't pay child support based on their jurisdiction, a judge can sentence you time. I've never been a supporter of that because you can't pay it if you're in prison and you don't have a job. So I'm not even sure what the purpose of that is, but I get it. Some fathers are deadbeats, but also some are down on they're just down on their luck, or they can't, or they're unemployed, or they don't have the skill level, or whatever. But I would think that if you're out and you're off probation and you have back debts to pay, whether it's alimony, child support, or whatever, likely opportunity to get with a judge and get that reduced or get a payment plan over time or something of that nature. But if you're in jail or you're on probation and you can't get a job, you can't pay anybody back, right, Jessica? I mean, the purpose is get out on probation, which this bill has nothing to do with how you get on probation. That's already settled. Virginia has that. So you're in jail, you get out, you go on probation. Nothing to do with this bill, right? Now you're out. And if you're doing all the right things, taking the right classes, have a job, assimilating back in society, we want to get you off probation based on earning those credits to get off as soon as you can to free up resources for other people that might be struggling or might have an issue like the young lady that was imprisoned in the tent being sexually assaulted every day, right? So get those resources freed up. But you want to encourage and incentivize those former inmates that are doing the right thing in order to get back in society. I mean, this idea that, let's let them linger in probation, hope they do something wrong so they can go back in. That's insane. Like who would be in favor of that?
Yeah. No, it doesn't make us any safer. It doesn't help the person, right? We need to be giving people real second chances, and we need to be allowing them to move forward with their lives.
And I want to get back to just the final thing here, which has nothing to do with your bill. But we're in a system, and everybody's got to understand this, Jessica. We live in a country, right, where when this public-private PPO thing, whatever it's called, public-private alliance or something, when that came into being, like let's privatize garbage collection and that, it was like a big thing in the early 2000s. They did that with prisons. We have prisons in this country that are public companies. They're privately owned. They're on the stock market. They have investors. There's a stock on the prisons. And the prisons make a profit by filling up the beds and getting money by the state or federal government for each person that's in a bed. So let's just understand this. Let's just be candid here. So the incentive for the prison ownership, which is traded on the stock market, some of them, is to keep as many people incarcerated as they can so they can maximize their revenue and profit. This is reality.
Yeah.
So they hire an army of lobbyists to do everything in their power. To do what? Keep people in jail. Keep them in jail. Don't go probation. When they get out of probation, get them back in as soon as they can. They're anti-reducing recidivism because that takes money out of their company. This is an insane way to run prisons. It's insanity. And if you really understand how this works, Jessica, these lobbyists run around in their $8,000 Armani Italian suits.
Oh, yeah.
And they drive up in their black limos, and they're lobbying state and local officials to do everything they can in order to keep people in jail so that they can make money.
Yeah. I've seen them coming out of the same offices I'm walking into, John. And I want to add one thing to that. It's not just the private prison facilities. All of our state prisons have contracts with private companies. They all have lobbyists as well. The people who provide food to the people in prison, the people who provide sheets for their beds, the people who provide the tablets or the phone service, right? They are all making incredible amounts of money off of people being inside of prisons. The people who provide the health care. You can pull some of their contracts with some of these states. We've done it before. And you will see in those contracts, they actually negotiate a floor, which is the minimum number of people that can be in that facility while they're serving them under their contract, right? So it is a complete incentive, financial incentive for them to be out there lobbying for people to be in prison. I see them coming out of the offices I'm walking into. They're sort of the silent folks that, you know, maybe donate to some of these legislators that are fighting us. And
now you're getting it. That's
terrible.
The way it works, right? They get the money, they donate it back to people that say, lock them up, throw away the key, right? This is the big circle of nonsense that goes on in state and local government with these lobbyists, right? I mean, we're seeing it now with all this, with, you know, all the fraud that's being exposed by Musk. All right, time for one more call. Tom in Florida, you're on with John and Jessica.
Great show, John. I couldn't agree more with what they're trying to do. As a 43-year law enforcement veteran, I have transported hundreds of people for violations of probation on minor offenses. And it's sad. It's like a hamster wheel. You get in it, you can't get out of it. It's phenomenal. And on the other side of that, when you talked about the child support, in Florida, they suspend the driver's license if you're back in arrears in child support. Now, how are you supposed to drive to go get a job to earn money? It makes no sense. And I hope the bill is signed by the governor and it's needs probation reform nationwide. Great show. You can dedicate a whole hour to this.
Well, that's what we're trying to do. Thanks. Because, you know, and thank you for the call, Tom. And look, we had a call earlier from Tony that disagreed. We have no problem with that. 888-480-JOHN. You can call us up, John and Jessica. Whether you agree or not is fine. I want to hear what you have to say. This is the People's Show. It's your voice. So we have no issue with it, with that. 888-480-5646. But Jessica, if you hear what Tom in Florida just said, the number of times he was transporting just minor probation violations, they go back to jail. And I mean, think about it. I mean, you're trying to make things work. This is not easy, right? You were convicted of a crime. You're wiped out. You have a lawyer, a public offender. You lost your job. You lost your family. Now you get out. Now what do you do, right? What we want you to do is find a job, try to figure this out, get back and be a productive member of society, right? Not go back in.
Yeah, exactly. And Tom made a good point in the beginning. He's law enforcement. He sees the waste. He sees how ridiculous this system is. This bill is actually supported by a bunch of law enforcement. And we've seen law enforcement all across the country, including folks over at the American Probation and Parole Association, calling for reforms to the probation and parole system because they see what's going on. They see the massive fiscal waste of taxpayer dollars going to just locking people up and breaking their lives even more. Imagine you come home from prison, you've done your time, you are home already in the community. You go through the incredibly difficult task of finding a job, somebody who will give you that chance. And by the way, I've spoken to a lot of employers, and I actually hire people who've been formerly incarcerated. They're oftentimes your best employee. They are the hardest working folks because they want to make sure they keep that job. But let's say you get your job, you get reconnected with your family, you're back at church, you're back in your community, you've got your housing, you've got your car figured out, which is huge because oftentimes your credit is ruined when you end up in jail or prison. And then suddenly you miss a meeting, or you end up, leaving the jurisdiction to go see your grandmother, or something happens, right? Sometimes it can be completely innocuous. You might go to your friend's house and they have alcohol there and you're not allowed to be around alcohol. Or you might go to your mom's house and your cousin's there and he's also got a criminal record, right? Those are reasons why people are being put back in jails and prisons. They're not committing new crimes. They're out there trying to rebuild their lives. They're not posing a harm to anybody. They're out there trying to do their best, and they're ending up back in jails and prisons, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to taxpayers and making our system less safe.
Makes sense. And this bill is rewarding. It's the incentive for doing what the reformists are asking you to do. Take the right classes, get a job, do all the right things. So that's where you get the incentive. Okay, let's get to CJ in Richmond. CJ, you're on with John and Jessica. And of course, Jessica Jackson is the CEO of the Reform Alliance in Virginia and nationally. Go ahead, CJ.
How y'all doing this morning?
Good.
Interestingly enough, I've been listening to you all morning, and I haven't heard anyone speak on the cost that you actually incur while being incarcerated, the amount that you have to pay to actually be there, the $2 a day or $3 a day or whatever it is to be inside the prison while you're there, that you don't have any control over, that you can't pay back. So you're incurring a debt at that point to go along with whatever you have to pay for that's already outside of prison. Those are the technical issues that keep sending people back to prison. You're right. Most people, it's not so much that they commit crimes, it's that they are not making enough money to cover what they need to pay automatically, usually through no fault of their own, because although you don't have to pay child support, you're still being charged. You're still accruing an interest. You're also getting money. You're being charged to be housed. So all of these things is incentivized, like you said, to have people incarcerated. And since it has been privatized, that's just the system that we are in now. And as long as people are making money off of this slave labor, as long as you have these people in prison that go out and do these minute jobs that you don't want to pay people for, and they can save money that way and make money that way, it's not going to change. I don't care what bill you put out. It's not going to change because it's not so much of giving somebody the training to do something. It's actually giving them an opportunity to make the funds and have the resources to pay back the government and have a type of lifestyle that you want to have without having to commit a crime in order to have it.
CJ, I didn't realize CJ is saying, Jess, that when you're incarcerated, like you're actually incurring the debt. So let's say you owe child support, even though it's suspended, you're paying interest on it, and then you're paying a fee to be there. So you have no job, so you can't pay that fee. So then that accumulates. Then you get out, you have all this debt, and you can't pay it. And now you're trying to get a job, and now you got people trying to put you back. Like, can you address what CJ just said? By the way, CJ, I didn't know that. Very enlightening call. And stay on if you want to comment, CJ. Stay on. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways that the system causes financial havoc on people, right? I met somebody the other day who was paying off restitution for a drug crime. He had been caught with a possession and was having to pay back the government $10,000 for a drug crime. And in that $10,000, they said was the prosecution of him. So, literally paying for the DA that had helped put him into prison, as well as some of his time in prison. I knew somebody else who was incarcerated up in Michigan and got his life back together during his incarceration, wrote a book, started self-publishing it. Next thing you know, he gets a bill from the state for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they said, you wrote a book about your experiences in prison and about being in prison. You profited off of it. And now you owe us for the cost of your incarceration. It's just ludicrous, right? So they're double dipping. They're making taxpayers pay for it. And then they're also charging people. And the effect, what CJ was saying, is you just can't get back on track, right? You owe all these fines and fees. You owe all this money. And by the way, there's oftentimes supervision fees as well. You can pay for the app that's tracking you. You pay supervision fees to a supervision officer for probation or parole to actually be supervised. But to CJ's point, you're just getting back on your feet. How are you supposed to be able to pay all of that, right? So then you have this debt hanging over your head, and it is hard for people to have to make that choice not to commit another crime to be able to get that debt off of their backs. Instead, with this bill, we're creating an opportunity for them to actually earn time off of their probation, which is going to lead to them being able to have more success, better jobs, get their education, do better, and hopefully be able to make more money. We do need to address the fines and fees. That's not this bill, but that is a huge problem throughout the system.